Howdy ho ho, my good people. How you doing? This is Unnecessary Rambling. I'm Brandon Sylvia. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you all for tuning in here today to talk some video games. I did I guess we're just going to call it rambling reviews, where I ramble through my thoughts on the games that I have been playing as of late. And I've kicked off November pretty damn strong. Been playing a lot of stuff in November. So I'm going to separate these into two parts. And I think actually friend of the show, Sean Ward, recommended that might be a good idea just to, appease the algorithm gods a bit more. Instead of putting out an hour show, put out a couple 30-minute shows each month going over the games that I played for that month. And that just kind of lined up perfectly here for November, since I've played a good bit of stuff already in the month, and then I'll do another one of these at the back half of the month. But let's go ahead and get into it. I'm not going to waste any of your time. If you're new, consider subscribing. If you enjoy the content, give it a like, all that good stuff, yada yada. You know the drill at this point. But let's go ahead and kick off the show talking about Thirsty Suitors. That is the game that I finished most recently, and it's one that when it was revealed, I was very intrigued by it, but also kind of worried because there was a lot of systems, a lot of mechanics on offer with this game, kind of, blending the dating sim with a skateboarding game with a turn-based RPG. I was like, I could see this going disastrously and this thing being buggy as hell. I gotta say, I am very surprised with the final product here with Thirsty Suitors. This thing was polished to a shine. This thing runs really, really well, and all the systems mixed together in a cohesive manner, and I did not run into one single bug. I thought all of the gameplay systems that were on offer were interesting, fun, unique. It's an ambitious, innovative title, but at the same time, they didn't just like throw shit at the wall to see what stuck. Like, all of these systems, as ambitious as they are, the more you play the game, the more you start to see, okay, yeah, I see how they pulled all of this off. It's a lot of QTE based mechanics with all the different mini games, and even the turn-based RPG combat system, very reliant on QTEs. And it's a weird thing, like, the more you play the game, the more interesting mini games and stuff that you're finding. So it's not even hitting you that, oh yeah, I'm just kind of constantly doing these QTEs over and over again. You're more just filled with joy that you're seeing new things happen on the screen. And I was just so constantly impressed by the variety on offer that it took me a while for it to really sink in that this isn't necessarily the most mechanically complex game. Don't get me wrong. The fact that they pull off, skateboarding in this kind of small-ish open world and then running into random encounters, and also having like a lot of customization options on offer, changing your different clothing, and then combining that with the full dating sim reality show angle that you have on offer, as well as the turn-based battles. It is no doubt like they're doing a lot of things here, but I think they very easily could have got lost in the process of having all of these different systems and trying to like develop very, very specific mechanics for each system. And instead they went with, like I said, more of that QTE focus for the turn-based battles, which you guys know I'm not a turn-based guy whatsoever. I really enjoy the turn-based combat in this game, and I think a lot of it is because of those action elements and, staying a little bit more active in the combat and having to wait to time those button prompts correctly. And once again, I'm not a big QTE guy either, but it just really worked in this game, and they use that for the dancing mini games and the weightlifting mini games, as well as having like a fully fleshed out cooking mini game where you have these different recipes and you go in. I just thought about something. Have you guys ever seen the damn Michael Irvin clip where I think he was on ESPN, and I forget the exact quote. I'll drop the clip in I'll layer it into the video. It's one of the funniest clips I've ever seen in my fucking life.
Problem with that. I should have been running slants with a guy that sits in back of Peyton Manning and learn from Peyton Manning. Oh my God, this is what's wrong with today. The young ladies today, they're not learning from mom how to cook with losing recipes.
Anytime I say the word recipes, that clip just like immediately springs to mind. But anyways, back to the cooking and the recipes. It's like a full mini game where they have an approval system, and the better you cook, the more your dad or mom approves of it. But the coolest thing about that entire suite that they built out is that each time you go in and you're cooking, you're having a back and forth dialogue with your parents, and it really fleshes out the characters so much more. And I don't think the story is the absolute, strong point of this game. It very much is. I think the gameplay is definitely the star of the show here, but I appreciate so much how they build these characters up. Like, you really get an understanding of each character's in the small mundane moments, in the battles. Like, they are constantly trying to flesh out these characters for you to have a better understanding with them. And I guess leading straight into that, we should kind of talk about the base setup here. You're playing as a character named Jala, and she just got broken up with. She got kicked out of her partner's house, and she is heading back to her hometown, and she doesn't have anywhere to stay, so she's moving back in with her parents, and in the process, she's trying to like right some wrongs, and she's had a bit of a past, kind of a bit aloof, a bit flaky, and so you're going back and you're trying to make amends with these people, trying to course correct a little bit, but most people aren't having that shit. So they do this whole thing where you engage in a turn-based battle, and like you end up winning their heart back that way, and it's so fun and goofy and nonsensical. Like you'll taunt the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend or just the person in general that you're battling. You'll have to like taunt them, so you'll flirt with them and make them thirst over you, and then they'll be more susceptible to certain attacks, and all the taunts kind of line up with the big finishing moves, and you have to go in and pick out which ones are more effective, and they have it all laid out pretty simply for you. So it's not like a overly complex turn-based RPG battle system by any means. But for someone like me, who's not the biggest turn-based RPG fan, I enjoyed that, as well as having those active-based elements in there. And they have summons, so you can go and you can summon your mom or some of your different, once you make amends with your ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, you can summon them into battle, and they'll appear as like this big giant, and like your mom will take off her flip-flop and stomp the shit out of the enemy you're in battle with at that moment. I will say, though, I do think the skateboarding is definitely the weakest part of this game. I don't think it's bad per se. I never wanted to engage with it more than just like riding around the world, cruising on the skateboard, doing a grind and a kickflip and, a special move, and then latching on to a telephone wire and riding the damn telephone wire like a maniac. But the actual, challenges that you could participate in, and then the leaderboards and stuff like that, I never really had much interest in doing that, because the mechanics of the skateboarding just, obviously, I'm not saying it should be on par with something like a Tony Hawk or something like a skate, but I wasn't quite sure what they were even going for, because it feels very stiff and not in like a semi-skate-esque manner. And then it doesn't have that same flow and arcadiness of a Tony Hawk game. So you're kind of just left with the ability to ride around on your skateboard, but not feel like you actually have great control over what you're doing. So I would definitely say that was probably the weakest part of the game for me. Like I said as well, the narrative I don't think is the star of the show. I don't think the narrative is bad at all. I think the characters are all really fleshed out, very well written, great performances across the board. The voice acting is phenomenal here. But I think you might have the issue of slightly too many characters in this game. It's only a 7-8-ish hour game, and you're having to battle a lot of your exes and a lot of, different family members, and rekindling relationships in both departments, and it's just a lot of characters being thrown at you. And I do think, like I said, they do a really great job with the time that they're given to flesh these characters out. But I just kind of feel like if there were less characters in general, I would have probably just cared a lot more about the base plot line. And I know one of the main talking points around this game right now is the political shit. This is definitely a left-leaning, I would say a pretty far left-leaning game, and they don't really try to hide that, and I don't think they should try to hide that. Just, tell the fucking story that you want to tell. I get bummed out by a lot of these conversations with same thing that we talked about earlier with Hogwarts Legacy, a game that I loved, and it just becomes like this political trash, like dumpster fire, where we can't even critique the merits of the game or analyze the good and the bad. It's such a fucking mess, and that's just really not my shtick. I think a lot of that stuff is pretty fucking cheap, if I'm being honest. It's a really simple way to get engagement, to get clicks, to just, do this fucking outrage porn, this outrage political porn that people flock to like fucking sheep. And I'm not doing that here. I'm not engaging with any of that shit, because my thing is this: I don't really give a damn about your political preferences. If you make something that's really cool, really ambitious, or just something that's interesting to me, I want to check it out. And I will always value high quality games over the rest of that nonsensical garbage. And to me, this is absolutely, positively a very, very high quality game. A game that I very much enjoyed. And also, staying there in that lane, this game is a lot more about forgiveness than really anything else, about forgiving yourself and also putting in the work to warrant that forgiveness. Nobody should forgive themselves if they're not actively trying to make sure that they don't repeat their past mistakes. And that's kind of the main, just central through line with this game, is that Jala is trying to, and that's kind of cool too, is you do have some agency in the plot where you can continue fucking up and going down a wrong path. I mean, they have a lot of the main beats laid out for you, and you can't really change a lot of like the main stuff, but you do have some agency in the narrative. You can make some decisions throughout the game, but the main takeaway I had after playing the game was like, oh yeah, this is a lot about forgiveness. And I don't know, I just think that's a pretty positive, like genuinely sweet message to take away from any narrative, regardless of which political side you lean towards. I think if you had to like add up my smiles per minute while playing games in 2023, I really think that this game might be up there, might be number one in terms of how often I was smiling while playing a game in 2023. Just when I'm looking for, developers to try new things and be unique, be innovative, be creative. And also, I didn't even talk about this, the art style is impeccable here. It feels very Double Fine. A lot of this game just in general feels like something that could have been created by Double Fine, because you're often getting transported to these super trippy worlds when you're in the battles, in these like fantasy worlds when you're doing the turn-based battles, and it feels very, very Double Fine inspired. And obviously I'll have, gameplay in here for you guys to see everything, but I was smiling so often while playing this. It feels so fresh. This feels totally fresh, totally unlike anything I've ever played. I had a tremendous time with this game. Sure, I have my critiques with it, but if I was to score this, I really think I'd probably be around an 8.6, 8.7. Definitely one of the standout titles of the year, and just the uniqueness factor of it might be the most unique game I've played this year. But let's go ahead and move on over to a game that's a little bit more traditional by design, but also very strange in its own right. The fact that this even came out this year is very, very bizarre, and that is RoboCop Rogue City. So I had a really weird experience with this game. I ran into a lot of annoying ass bugs, like a lot of annoying ass bugs while playing RoboCop Rogue City, and constantly having to restart my checkpoints, and I probably wasted a good hour and 20 minutes just restarting checkpoints and going back 10 minutes to get to the area I was when it bugged out, and doing this over and over. That was very, very annoying. And I mean, this is a full price, or a $60 game. And when I buy these games and I play through them, and I'm, coming in here to critique them and talk about them with you all, I want to very much make note of these things that some people might blow off, and they're like, it's got a little jank, a little rough around the edges. While some other people are like, dude, I don't want to fucking spend my $60 on something that's going to bug the hell out on me multiple times. So I just want to lay that out up front. I did run into a lot of bugs with this game. However, on the other hand, I had a lot of fun with this thing when it was running properly. This is a very, very weird game to come out this year. And for it to be as high quality as it is, and as like deep and narratively rich as it is, like you have full dialogue decisions and shit in this game. And you have like legit agency over certain moments in the narrative. I would have never expected that in my wildest dreams. I was just expecting, slow, methodical, first-person shooter that's really, really crunchy and really, really gory, and that is absolutely on offer as well. The environmental destruction in the combat was the first thing that stood out to me as like, oh wow, this is really, really badass. Just taking off the damn paneling of a wall, having an enemy who's hiding behind a crate or a box or whatever, and you can barely see his head poking out, so you shoot the box a couple times and you shatter a little bit of his cover where he's hiding his head, and you just pick his ass off real quick. An enemy charging at you, and you pull out the shotgun, blast his ass in the head. You see the damn blood splat on the wall behind you. It is very, very visceral, very gory. You guys know I'm a fan of that shit. That is on full display in RoboCop Rogue City. And just the fact that you can like grab enemies, you grab them with R1 and you can just sling them into other enemies, or grab different objects, different items off the ground, grab a tanker, throw the tanker into the next room, try to line up a shot as it's flying into the next room, blast that bitch. You see the damn fuel tank or whatever explode. The fire's just engulfing every enemy in the vicinity. Just walking up to motherfuckers and punching them in the head, killing them with one shot. Like, you are an absolute freaking brute, an absolute tank. And I mean, that gameplay stays consistently fun. And the thing I was not worried about, because I don't really mind when games are super easy. I'm cool to just totally chill out and experience something in a nice breezy fashion, but they do a good job of balancing this so you're not just totally overpowered. They give you enough variety of enemies and enough just quantity of enemies thrown at you constantly that you do at times feel a little bit under duress, a little bit like you could potentially die, which I guess, you're already dead, but you get what I'm saying there. They do enough to spice that up to give you a decent degree of difficulty. And I also should say, that might be my fault 100%. It might be a lot easier for most of you who aren't absolute fucking idiots, and anytime you see dialogue options in a skill tree, you immediately go to that and just min-max the hell out of the dialogue. You put all your points in the dialogue and you don't upgrade your armor or your vitality or your combat. And in a RoboCop game, like, what the hell are you doing, dude? Why am I going in and upgrading my dialogue options? Like, I don't think I gained much of anything by doing that in RoboCop Rogue City. It allows you to see, like, whenever the dialogue options will pop up, it allows you to see like which option is more of an empathetic response. So when you select that option, you know that the character that you're talking to is going to respond fondly to the dialogue option that you selected. But do I think that really made much of a difference in my experience whatsoever? No. Do I think it was a justified sacrifice by not putting my points into armor and vitality and combat and all this, and instead just going all in on dialogue? Probably not. But I guess staying there with the dialogue, with the story, I think it's cool in two parts. In one part, I think it's cool that they don't try to like build up this big origin story, and it's like, yeah, you're RoboCop, go kill some motherfuckers and then deliver justice and all that shit. But in the same breath, they also do really establish the Murphy. What's his Alex? Alex, I'm not the biggest RoboCop fan. I think it's Alex Murphy is the dude, the actual man behind RoboCop. They do a good job of exploring his character a little bit more and allowing you to see his family dynamic a bit before he was killed. And RoboCop is having these issues where he's glitching out and he's like unable to complete his objective at certain times. And he's having these flashbacks where he is, going back and seeing himself as Alex Murphy, and all of, the humanity was supposed to have been removed from RoboCop. So you're dealing with that. You're dealing with increasingly more and more of the humanity returning to RoboCop throughout the game. And that's where a lot of the decision making comes into play as well. You have a therapist who is constantly talking to you and evaluating you after each mission, and you kind of get to decide throughout the game how you view RoboCop, and internally that, since you're playing as RoboCop, that's kind of how he views himself in the game. And I mean, the fact that you just have this small, open world to go around and explore. You're exploring the streets of Detroit, and you can go and issue parking tickets to people as RoboCop. And they also, at the beginning of the game, you're taking complaints at the precinct. People are coming up to you. All the civilians are coming up to you and complaining. But with the, kind of smaller side quest, on top of that, they also have fully fleshed out, deeply narrative side quest, one where you can help this reporter in her quest to essentially expose the OCP, and or you can try to sabotage her quest in doing so. They have like a full mayor electoral campaign going on, and you get to pick which political party you support, and they both try to appeal to your sensibilities. They come up to you and they're like, hey, this is what we're going to offer you, da, 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 da. They try to get you on their side, so because RoboCop's kind of like famous and everybody loves him, and so having him attached to their campaign obviously is incredibly influential. But also, like I said, RoboCop glitching out more and more, he's also having to kind of prove that he is not malfunctioning, and there's even a storyline that's tied into that with the reporter that I won't really go into, but let's just say your decision making really has an effect on that situation at a certain point. And like I said, I don't have a ton of RoboCop nostalgia, but a lot of the actors are reprising their role for this game. So the people who do have that built up RoboCop nostalgia, some of their favorite characters coming back and playing those roles for the first time in decades, like that's really, really sick, man. I thoroughly enjoyed my experience with RoboCop Rogue City. Outside of the bugs, this would be well in the 8s for me. If there were no bugs, this would definitely be somewhere in the 8s. This was a fun game. I enjoyed the shit out of this and was constantly surprised by how good the narrative was. With the bugs and just the frequency and how often those bugs were just incredibly intrusive to the experience, I would have to knock it back a few points, but I'd still say I'm somewhere in the fairly high 7s. I'd probably say something like a 7, 7, 7, 8. All right, so the next few games that we're going to talk about here are all backlog titles, so I'll just run through these pretty quickly. I played through Outlast 2. Finally got around to Outlast 2. I played through Outlast 1 a few years ago. A weird thing that I noticed, and I've been noticing this for quite a few games. I noticed it whenever I booted up BioShock, the Remastered Collection. I didn't have any of my trophies for BioShock 1. I noticed that all of my trophies for Outlast 1 were missing. I noticed I played through Spider-Man Miles Morales either late last year or earlier this year. I wanted to replay it before Spider-Man 2. All of my trophies were missing for that. So I started thinking back, like, why in the hell has this happened? And then I went and looked at Miles Morales' release date, and it was late 2020. It was holiday 2020. I remember playing through BioShock 1 and Outlast back to back in October of 2020, because I remember that was like one of the first YouTube videos that I did on Easygoing Gaming that actually did pretty well, and it was October, the Halloween season for 2020. So I have no idea what the hell happened with my system in late 2020. Also, whenever I was going through and checking, I looked at the release calendar for 2020, and I went back to that holiday, that late 2020 season, to see what else came out that I played. And Dark Pictures, that was Little Hope, I think. Yeah, I think it was Little Hope that was late 2020 when it came out. And lo and behold, I have no fucking trophies for that game either. And I'm not like a trophy hunter or anything, so it doesn't really bother me, but I do often look back at my trophies just to remind myself of the games I've played, especially for, end of the year stuff, end of the year content, and even just random lists to like remind myself, oh yeah, that I actually did like that. And I'm doing an upcoming 2023 Hidden Gems video, and I've been constantly going through my trophies and my achievements or whatever in Xbox to, oh yeah, that game right there, I actually did really enjoy that. Let me jot that down. So it does annoy me just to know that some of that shit can randomly go missing. But anywho, Outlast 2, I finally played through and finished Outlast 2. I wasn't incredibly hot on the first game, and I'm even much cooler on Outlast 2 than Outlast 1. I think the setup for Outlast 2 actually fucking rules, and I think the locations are cool and creepy and effective, but I guess we'll start there. The base setup is that you are playing as a camera guy who is also the husband to, or boyfriend to, his wife, girlfriend, whatever it is, who she is like an investigative reporter. And you are in this helicopter going off to this undisclosed creepy location where it was reported that a woman killed herself, but there's a lot of misinformation regarding that case, and a lot of just speculation that might not have been the case, that she might have been murdered. So your wife is on the hunt, trying to sniff out that case, and you are going and filming it. And obviously, as you would expect, the helicopter malfunctions, it crashes, and you're abandoned in this creepy ass location, and you end up running into like an RE7 cult, but more of a religious angle in Outlast 2. And you're out there hiding in these cornfields that can kind of feel like mazes at times, and you're repeating these same patterns. You feel like you're going in circles and kind of going crazy at a certain point. And I do think that is cool and effective. However, it's just a lot of that and nothing else. Like, it's dope that they have certain sections where you're swimming a little bit, or you're rafting and trying to get away and get to safety and to find your wife. But another big focus of the game is going back to the past. You have these flashback sequences that take you back to either your middle school or some school, period of your life where you were in school, and you're going to this school, and oh boy, that shit is boring. Like, that shit is unbelievably boring and minimally scary, minimally spooky. Like, nothing about that it got a rise out of me. Nothing about that shocked me. I thought the coolest thing about that in general was just the transition animations of how they would lead you to the school. Like, you would close, you would be inside of a fucking closet or whatever, hiding. You would shut the doors, and then that would transition you and lead you straight back to the school. And it was a cool sequence of how it played out in this flashback style scenario. But what you were actually doing when you got into the school was just mind-numbingly boring. I'm gonna run down a hallway. The door's gonna be locked. I'm gonna turn around and run back to the door that I just came through, and now it's locked too. And now I'm just gonna run back and forth down the hallway while they set up the next narrative beat. I'll hear a creepy laugh, a jump scare, and then we'll get right back to the woods. And I actually think the game does go in some really cool and really disturbing directions. It is, it's still in that same vein with heavy emphasis on the body horror, but I appreciate where they go. The ending of this game, it really, really gets you from a narrative standpoint. I was actually left shocked by that in specific, more than I was with any of the jump scares or the holy shit horror moments. I actually thought the narrative was okay. And really, I would even say, this is a probably 7-ish hour game. I'd say the last 45 minutes in general are truly, truly fantastic. Like, truly, truly memorable, pulling things off that I definitely did not expect. And it was such a just vastly different experience than the first, 5.5 hours or so. But I'm also aware, saying I like 20% of a game and not the other 80% doesn't necessarily bode well for the overall score that I will give it. And it's not even that I think the game is awful or something that I wouldn't recommend. It's just something that you need to go into understanding that it's a very, very simple setup. The game just is fundamentally extremely, extremely simple in what it's trying to achieve. I appreciate how influential the Outlast games were and the Amnesia games before that, but going back to it now, I'm just like, oh boy, this is not enjoyable. And not, I don't, horror games don't necessarily have to be enjoyable. They're granted that luxury that a lot of other games aren't. And I actually derive a lot of enjoyment from being spooked out. I just don't really necessarily find this game scary. And the fact that it's such a minimalistic approach to game design, to me, you just weren't really left with a lot outside of some really cool narrative beats littered in here and there. Overall, I'd give this like a 6.2 2 or so. It's a totally competent game, and if you do want to run around some creepy locations in a walking sim style manner, running away from enemies, hiding under beds, hiding in closets, and doing that whole chase sequence and repeating that over and over again throughout the game, you're gonna find enjoyment in this. It's really well presented. It's extremely polished for what it is. It's just not my cup of tea at all. So I'd say 6.2 or so. And I also went back and played The Amazing Spider-Man 2. When I did my Spider-Man ranking, my Spider-Man games ranking, I kind of felt bad that I shit on this game and The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 3. I'm going to replay all of those games because I felt bad for shitting on them and not having replayed them in a long ass time. And I don't know, I just kind of wanted to make sure that I was fresh on the majority of the games. Like by the time I do the next Spider-Man ranking, when Spider-Man 3 comes out in 5 years, if I'm still doing YouTube, I want to have a fresh memory on pretty much all of the games. So I'm going to go back and play The Amazing Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 3. I'll probably replay the PS1 games as well. Might even throw myself a treat in there, play Spider-Man 2 before that point, the PS2 title. It's been a while since I've dove back into that. But yeah, so I started off with the game that I hated the most on that list, and I'll just kind of progressively work my way up to the games I like more. And yeah, going back to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I despise this game. I totally despise this game. My memory did not deceive me on this one. This shit sucks. I do not like this game at all. The voice acting is terrible. The writing is terrible. It's so unbelievably cheesy. I can appreciate the fact that it's not like directly copying the everything that took place in the movie. They have their own little setups and villain arcs and shit, which fine, sure. But none of it is well executed. The only cool thing about this game, and I'm glad I remembered this when I did my ranking, the only thing that's cool about this is swapping the hands. L2 to swing with your left hand, R2 to swing with your right hand. That's the only cool thing about this game. The combat is boring as shit. The boss fights are boring as shit. It's ridiculously janky. Clearing out a room full of enemies. I'm talking a ton of enemies in your cheap-ass Arkham combat, which feels totally nonsensical when you're playing as Spider-Man, and it not having the agility, and it doesn't work at all. But having that combat and clearing out a room full of enemies, just constantly pressing fucking square over and over again, clearing out a room full of enemies, and after you've beat up like 50-60 of these goons, you go to the guy who was, the innocent person, the hostage or whatever. You go to the person, and that's obviously the mission objective is to clear out the enemies and get that guy to safety. And when you get to him, he just totally doesn't respond to you at all. So you're like, oh, well, I guess there should be another enemy in this area. So you're going and looking around for another enemy. You can't find one. Then off in the corner, some dude like glitching through the world. You punch him a few times as he stands still, or just a dude just kind of standing off doing absolutely nothing. You beat him up real quick, go back to the guy, progress through the mission. It's not like game breaking bugs. You're not really given too many game breaking bugs. At least playing through it this time, I didn't have any game breaking bugs. It was just little annoying things like that were constantly popping up. I think I talked about this in the ranking as well, but the camera is so busted. It's just so tight, and up close, like I said, with that Arkham style approach, which works because he's a brute. He's a tank. He's not moving all over the place. He's not web swinging and flying around. He's kind of low to the ground. And then they, pull it back in Arkham City when he's gliding around and stuff. And here with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, anytime you try to wall run, when you're web swinging and you try to wall run, the camera just like hones in on Spider-Man, gets super close up behind him. You're like, dude, you can't see anything. Yeah, just not good at all. This is one I definitely didn't have to go back to. This is just as bad as I remembered it. I'd score this like a 5.4. So I had a little fear of missing out syndrome taking place when I was seeing everybody rave about Alan Wake 2. And so I booted up Alan Wake 1. And I just wanted to see if I was crazy. I hated the combat in the first game. I hated it. So I dropped the difficulty down to easy, which is something that you can't do mid-game. And so if you start on normal, which I start pretty much every game on normal, And so if you start on normal and then you get annoyed by the combat or you find it too difficult or whatever, you can't just like drop it down to easy and keep going forward. And so I ended up putting it down, and it wasn't necessarily that I found the game hard. I just truly didn't like the combat. So I was like, I'm good. I'm moving on. But I went back to it, and I dropped the difficulty down to easy. And for one, I just totally misread the situation with the combat. Like that's a me problem. I gotta admit, I didn't understand that this is just a straight up action game. Like, you just shoot nonstop. You unload every bullet you have, the most powerful weapons you have. There is no need to conserve resources whatsoever. You don't need to try to hoard ammo and save up your resources, or there's no like inventory management taken. Like, it's not a survival horror game at all. And so when I was playing it as a survival horror game and trying to only use my pistol when I have my rifle or my shotgun or whatever, and I'm not using my most powerful weapons, of course I'm going to get annoyed by the damn combat. And also I did not understand the flashing the light and waiting for that like little pop sound and shooting at the perfect time. I totally misread the combat in this game, and I'll throw my hands up and admit I was wrong in that instance. Do I think it's the greatest combat in the world? No. Do I think the reliance on the flashlight is a little bit silly? Absolutely. But in terms of what put me off the game was just my own stupidity the first time. I played it like a survival horror game instead of an action game. It's an action game, and playing through it as an action game this time, yeah, there's some real cool shit in here. The moment that really stood out to me where I had to kind of check myself was the first time that you hop into a vehicle and you're actually able to like drive the vehicle and run over enemies that are chasing after you. And I was like, oh, this is much more ambitious than I thought. And it really seemed from that point the game just constantly leveled up the ambition factor. Like, you were seeing platforming sections that had like mild puzzle solving going on, and it kind of invoked that fear of heights that I would get from something like Silent Hill 3, where the environments, the terrain actually felt dangerous. And I'm not somebody who has a fear of heights really, but I was actually very cognizant of my surroundings and trying to walk slowly with Alan Wake so I don't, tip off the side of this platform that I'm using to get to my destination. And I always thought the atmosphere was excellent, second to none in a lot of ways. And just the world building, and I believe the town is called Bright Falls, the way that they give you this creepy, because it's so, the setup is so strange, where you're going on this like getaway vacation. Well, I guess it first starts off where you end up possibly killing someone as you're driving, and then you flash forward as you're on vacation. Alan Wake wakes up in a car next to his wife. You're heading to Bright Falls, and then you get to Bright Falls, and just the whole creepy setup there where people are like idolizing Alan Wake, the writer, and it's like, I don't know which seems less likely, that you get to this town and everybody here knows you and idolizes you, or in the world where you ran over the dude and woke up out of your sleep. Like, which of these worlds is reality, which is fiction? And playing with that throughout the game, I thought was interesting the entire time, and especially where they take the game in terms of Alan Wake having to, his wife is kidnapped. That happens pretty early on. His wife's kidnapped, and you have to go and find her, and then you're piecing everything together by, grabbing his different manuscripts and reading through those, and that's piecing together the story more and more. And the takeaway that I had there, and I don't know if this is correct, but the takeaway that I ended up coming to is like, I wonder if this is analogous, or I wonder if there is, in some way, this is referencing the fact that work is preventing him from, like, he feels like that somebody is being trapped behind his work, or maybe he himself is being held hostage by his work. And I think we've all been there, where it's like, okay, well, once I get this work done, then I'm really going to you're going to be my whole priority, and we're going to, we're going to have a great time, and that we're going to have this vacation, this getaway. It's going to be amazing. And it's easy to constantly feel like you're being held hostage by your work. And I thought that was really just an interesting way to play with that idea. The wife being held hostage, you having to finish your work in order to even have your relationship back. Or it could just be as simple as, within every artist, the place where you find the most brilliance is often the place where you find the most insanity. When you look at the most prolific, most successful artists, most of those motherfuckers are a little fucked up. Not the most mentally stable group of human beings. But yeah, I'm not going to go into a full review on the game. We're already running a little bit long here, but I suffice it to say that I'm glad I went back to it. I was able to appreciate this on a totally different level, and some of the set pieces in this game, like I talked about, how they set up the ability even just for you to drive around in the car and take in the vibes and just chill and go off, off-roading for a little bit, taking the Jeep off-roading, and then having the more tense elements where the enemies are running at you and you're taking them bitches out with the car, running them over. And sure, the car, it doesn't control incredibly well. You're not playing a Grand Theft Auto game, but the fact that in this third-person horror shooter, you have the ability to traverse around this town in vehicles, and you can kind of use them, not often, but they have multiple different set pieces designed around you using a vehicle, and that is not common at all in horror games. See, I know that might be a weird thing to stand out so much to me, but that definitely stood out to me as something where I'm going, oh, yeah, this team were very, very ambitious in the development of this title. There's a moment really early in this game that I remember standing out from the first time I played it, but it still hits just as hard. Whenever you get to this building and inside a trailer really early on, and you pick up the phone to call the police, and you see the big lumberjack looking dude cut down the telephone pole, you see it falling in the distance, and then you're kind of scrambling looking for a way out, and the dude just rams the trailer off the cliff with this whatever forklift, bulldozer, whatever the hell it is, and you jump out in the nick of time. Like, that's a really, really cool, just super standout moment in this game. And the narrative is just so good throughout, and how they kind of fuse the gameplay into the narrative. They do a real good job with that. And like I said, there are plenty of criticisms, plenty of things I don't like about this game. The probably biggest standout is that the enemy variety on offer is just horrible. I never once felt invested in battle at all. I thought the combat was serviceable. It was fine when I began to really understand it, but what I was shooting at, just these shadowy figures, I could not give a fuck less about. And I do think going into the full-on survival horror direction, I can see how that benefited Alan Wake 2 greatly. Like I said, I haven't played it yet. I'm refusing. I'm holding off, but I can imagine, especially given some more money with the Epic budget backing them, which, I mean, they had Microsoft backing them for Alan Wake 1, I believe. So they had some budget, but I think Remedy's on a new level after Control, and I'm really pumped to check out Alan Wake 2, especially after kind of understanding and appreciating Alan Wake 1 a bit more, but I'm gonna have to wait. If it goes on sale for like $40, $35-$40, I'll probably pick it up, but not paying $60. I know that's not a full review breaking down all the mechanics and all the systems, but if you wanted a quick score for Alan Wake 1, I would probably say an 8.3. And speaking of playing games on easy, I also jumped into Metal Gear Solid 3 with the Master Collection, whatever the hell they're calling it. It's pretty much just the Blue Point game ported, but jumped into MGS3 and I played it on easy. I just wanted a quick refresher for MGS3. I didn't really want to, because it usually takes me like 15-20 hours to beat Metal Gear Solid 3. And I just wanted to get reacquainted with that story before jumping in to the remake, just to be able to see like what is changed and if any of the systems are reworked, if the story is rewritten at all. I wanted to have that kind of fresh in my memory when going into the remake. Plus, MGS3 has never really been my favorite of the Metal Gear Solid trilogy, or the first 3 games. MGS3 was always my least favorite of the first 3. So I just kind of wanted to hop back in and play through it. Like I said, it usually takes me 15 to 20 hours to get through it when I'm going through it in a normal difficulty, playing more of a stealth-based, gameplay loop, and playing through it like Rambo. I ran through the damn game in 10 hours or so. It was a absolutely great time. I still don't think that much changes in terms of my overall opinion with MGS3. It still is my least favorite of the first 3 games. But I mean, that's just down to the fact that it's totally different from 1 and 2, with those being very much stealth, action espionage titles, and MGS3 is a straight up survival game. It's 100% a survival game with tons of systems in place to emphasize how much of a survival game this really is. Having to go in and clean up your wounds and, remove the bullets with the knife and then put the ointment on and wrap it up with a Band-Aid, and going through the grass, killing a snake and having to eat the snake, and trapping the different animals, and you're having to go in and manually camouflage yourself so you can stay undetected. This game has a ton of systems, and that was the real reason I wanted to jump back into it, because I remember all of that, obviously, but I just wanted to refamiliarize myself with it to see if any of that will change at all. And I imagine it probably won't. They're saying it's going to be a direct 1-to-1 recreation of MGS3, but a lot of the narrative stuff I totally forgot about. So I wanted to freshen up on that, because that's the one thing. If anything changes with that game, I could see some of the narrative stuff getting pulled out, because some of that stuff doesn't hold up by today's standards to certain people. There's quite a bit of like hypersexual content that I'm curious if Konami is going to allow that to release in 2023. I'm really, really interested to see if that happens. But the actual story, I mean, holy shit, man. That it is a fun story. I forgot how fun this story is. It feels like a James Bond story with like a lot of its romantic angles and shit. It's super, super silly and fun. And of course, it's also incredibly political and incredibly deep, and all the tons of fucking lore. I mean, it's probably 5 hours, 6 hours of cinematics in this game. And you got the real world events coinciding with the events in the game. You're talking about some of the biggest historically significant events that took place in the 60s. They're constantly referencing the JFK assassination, and then they're blending that into the game events and the development of the first Metal Gear. And then you have heavy ties to the Cold War, and also trying to understand Snake's relationship to the boss. And this isn't Solid Snake, this is Naked Snake, who is actually Big Boss. And then you have the whole cloning operations that take place throughout MGS 1 and 2. It's a lot. It's undeniably a lot of lore. And I think that's why it's very refreshing that at the end of the day, it's kind of a silly, at its fundamental basis, it's kind of a silly superhero spy story. The villains and all the characters are so goddamn ridiculous and humorous, and that levity is much needed in a story with so much goddamn lore. And people talk about Resident Evil's story being convoluted and being a mess. I understand that Metal Gear story is much more mature, much better told across the board, but that story is still a bit of a fucking mess. Incredibly convoluted at the very least. And if you're someone like me who struggles to keep up with some of that shit, it's just nice that regardless if you can follow along or if you can't, it's still just a really fun time. And even some of the heavier themes can be boiled down in pretty simplistic terms. It's a lot about the pitfalls of patriotism and where your loyalty really lies. Does your loyalty lie with your people or your country? And so I think most of that stuff is fairly easy enough to follow along with. The voice work is so great. Perfectly cheesy in the right moments, perfectly serious when it needs to be. It's an incredible story. But like I said, the main reason I jumped into this was just to get refreshed before getting into the remake. And I noticed quite a few things here that I think should definitely be cleaned up. And the idea of this just being a 1-to-1 recreation of that game, like, a lot of quality of life updates are needed. So I'm hoping that they're keeping that into account and they're not just going to completely rely on all the old systems and all the kind of archaic just game design in general in MGS3 with the remake. I mean, even something as simple as having a new map would go a really long way. That's one of the big reasons I've always hated going back to MGS3 is that the environments just look so damn samey for quite a while in the early moments of that game, and just having a mini map or a compass and having some quick simple navigation tools at your disposal would be wonderful. And just in general, the over reliance on constantly having to go into that menu and break up the pacing of the game, that is a massive hindrance to your enjoyment with MGS3. And you know, having the going in and if you want to swap to a new weapon, you have to go to the menu, and I think you click on the option where it says empty in your weapon menu. You go in, select the weapon, it drops it back into the empty slot, opposed to just having like a simple weapon wheel that you can swap around, like automatically swaps, and then you can go in and tinker with it when you see fit. And the same thing on the other end with all your, you know, different objects that you find throughout the game. Just how annoying it is to have to go through all those goddamn steps. There has to be a more seamless way of incorporating that in the remake. Also, not being able to pause cutscenes really fucking sucks, especially when your cutscenes are this long. And for some of you and myself, I often have to answer my phone for work, and if I have to answer my phone for work while I'm playing a game, it really sucks that I can't just simply pause this 8-hour long cutscene that I'm watching and then come back to it after I take my phone call. But like I said, I did have fun playing as Rambo in this game and just totally annihilating my enemies, running up the sides of mountains, blasting motherfuckers with a shotgun, jumping into a turret, taking out the helicopters, the oncoming helicopters one by one. And I don't know, I was just doing more risky experimental shit that I usually wouldn't do when I play it on normal. Like I took out Quiet early on and avoided the boss fight later on in the game. And usually I don't do that because I'm like, I don't want to alert these enemies and have this big battle take place. And when I'm playing it on easy, I'm like, I don't give a shit. We can have this big old battle. I'll run up to them one by one, take them out with my shotgun. I don't give a shit. And for as outdated as this game is visually, I think there are a lot of moments that are truly like awe-inspiring when you're in that moment that I was talking about there, when you're running up the side of the mountain and you're looking off on the horizons, and it's just really beautiful. I think that for as drab and just green and brown and earthy as these environments are, as depressing as they are, it really highlights certain moments of the game when you see different, more unique looking locations. It just adds some sort of sensory like palate cleanser, and you're able to appreciate, even if the environments aren't just totally beautiful, you're like, oh wow, this looks new. And you're just happy to see something that's not so goddamn green and brown. So I don't know, I don't think the game has held up incredibly well. It's still a fun enough experience, but like I said, MGS3 was never one of my favorites from the first 3 games, and I played through all of these back to back, maybe like 5-6 years ago or so, and I felt that way then. I feel that way now. I'm pretty sure that opinion won't change when I go back to MGS1 and MGS2. I just like the more linear, tight focus to those games than MGS3 with the kind of bigger worlds to explore. That's also why Metal Gear Solid 5, I think, is actually my least favorite Metal Gear Solid game of all time. It's just, I don't prefer the big open worlds. I like the tight stealth, action, espionage, covert operations. That's my shit with Metal Gear Solid. But yeah, man, that is everything that I've played through so far in November, burning through some titles pretty quickly here in the first half of November, and I will update you again at the end of the month with what I played in the back half of November. But I appreciate y'all for tuning in, for stopping by. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more content. Comment down below with what you have been playing. All of that good stuff drastically helps out the content, gets it into the hands, gets it into the eyeballs of more people, and greatly benefits the channel. So I really appreciate you guys. The channel has been doing pretty damn well as of late. The algorithm, for the first time in my fucking life, seems to actually be boosting me up, helping me a little bit, and that wouldn't be possible without you good people, so I really appreciate you all. But that's it for me, man. Thanks so much for stopping by. I will see you good people in the next video. Goodbye.